My name is Michael Kay, by the way. I should introduce myself. I'm head of school at the LaFell School. I like Jewish teenagers. And I see many, many members of our school community and obviously the broader community here tonight, and we're happy to have you. So, some of you may be familiar with the story of the RSS David Attenborough. Some nods about that. Okay, the RSS David Attenborough is a British research vessel designed for Antarctic research, owned by the National Environment Research Council. It just actually was launched this past year. It is fully equipped with all the latest stuff you need to explore the Antarctic, ice-breaking technology, enough space for 30 crew members and 60 researchers on board. It is 410 feet long, can go 19,000 nautical miles, has space for a helicopter on board, like state-of-the-art Antarctic research stuff. So the reason why it became famous, though, is not really because of any of that. It's that in March of 2016, this Natural Environment Research Council announced an internet and social media contest to come up with a name for this vessel they were going to be building, of course. 370,000 votes were cast in this contest, which tells you something about the internet and social media age. You can get 370,000 people, most of them purportedly adults, to take an interest in the name of this Antarctic research vessel. Sir David Attenborough, who's the great British broadcaster and naturalist, he didn't do so well in this election. He received 2.95% of the votes. There was a runaway winner in this election, as some of you clearly know. 124,109 people voted to name this research vessel Bodie McBoatface. Which is actually hard to say with a straight face. Ultimately, they decided not to name it Bodie McBoatface, but one of the submarines that's attached to the vessel is now called the RSS Bodie McBoatface. It's written right there along the side. So why am I telling you this? This is my favorite example of a fascinating phenomenon that I associate with this internet digital media age. It's an interesting convergence of what I would call the teenification of adults, which we're seeing alongside the adultification of teens. There are positives and negatives to this. We'll talk a little bit about it, but the lines between what is adult behavior and what is teen behavior is converging in really interesting ways. The teenification of adults, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. Maybe that's for a different symposium about the way in which adults demonstrate childlike behaviors online through suggestions of names like Bodie McBoatface and other ways. But the adultification of teens, I think, is worth spending a little bit of time on. There's some mixed research on this, but I'll tell you my anecdotal experience is that many features of youth life that we used to associate with high school are now manifesting themselves much sooner. The social drama that I think a lot of us associated with our high school experience, I see now peaking in grades 5 through 7. There's articles now that things that we would call relational aggression, the changing social dynamics, the changing friendships, is much more of a middle school or even pre-middle school phenomenon today, which, by the way, is not surprising given that, at least in this school, we hit the 50% cell phone penetration rate during 5th grade. Shifting relationships, the group chat dynamics, Snapchat sort of stuff. I was even talking to a parent just today who said that in her experience, eating disorders are now peaking much earlier as well. They also, by the way, seem to be easier to treat in preteens, which is helpful in that respect. But we are seeing a lot of this high school drama type stuff pushed younger and younger, which is a whirlwind for parents, but it's interesting and important implications for us. Because what happens on the other side of that is that by the time students get to high school, things do, I think, feel much more settled. The types of relationships that we're seeing mimic adult relationships much more. The drama, at least as I perceive it, I think is diminished in high school compared to middle school. The Snapchat-y kind of stuff, the group texting kind of stuff. I mean, I'll say that in this school in particular, we prohibit the use of cell phones during school hours in middle school, but not in high school, which could be a whole other conversation. But at least from my own perception, the use of the cell phone is much less of a distraction for the high school students than we used to see it being for the middle school students. There's a lot less relational drama, a lot less of that nonsense kind of stuff. And just to give one little preview that I don't know if you'll get to or not, the Gen Z research reports that high school students even like their parents now more than they used to. So what is the result of this adultification of teens? It's unprecedented opportunities for teenagers to take upon themselves real adult-style leadership, role modeling, community building. Childhood is faster than it used to be, which has benefits and drawbacks, but by the time they get over it more quickly, they're really ready to lead. And we're seeing this in a lot of very concrete ways. So just to give some examples from this school, which is the case that I know best, just from the past year. An email showed up in my inbox just about a year ago this week saying, we're organizing an opportunity for students to go out into the broader community and build Sukkot for families who don't have the capability to build them themselves. And I, as the head of school, got all sorts of compliments for this, and I said, I had no idea what this is or where it came from. It just showed up in my inbox, turned to the teenagers, well, it was their idea. They organized it, and they did it entirely on their own. We had back in January a mental health learning day for the whole community. A group of students came to me last fall and said, we want to do a mental health learning day. We want to open it up not only to our school, but to other local schools, to other local leaders, to bring in guests, to organize breakout groups. We want it to be hundreds of people. We're going to have it in the gym. You know what I said? Don't be too ambitious. It's too hard to pull something off like that. Let's set our goals in a more moderate, doable way. And what happened, Alex? They paid no heed whatsoever to what I suggested. They went ahead and it was far more effective than I ever imagined it to be. Entirely based on teenage organization and innovation. Similarly, a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, learning around the holiday of Shavuot last year, entirely student organized and student run. And as a result of this, I think teenage voices are being incorporated into adult level leadership in new and different ways. And again, just to take an example from our school, we have what's called I don't even know what it stands for. It's called LOCO, which is the something and coordination. They have planned the whole logistics and coordination group to plan the day-to-day activities of the high school. For the first time last year, a student was included on that board. So every single week, the logistical and organizational work of the school is discussed by the administrators and the student. And yesterday I was in Denver doing some consulting work for a Jewish school there, and at their board meetings, they include student representation to make sure that those voices are present there as well. So all of this is the result, I think, of this interesting convergence between the teenification of adults and the adultification of teens in this social media era. At the same time, though, that this convergence is going on, within the teen world, there's also a fascinating and potentially troubling divergence going on. That teens, like the ones who are behind the initiatives I just mentioned, are feeling more connected than ever to their Jewish communities and to Israel, and they're organically seeking ways to write their own leadership stories, which they're doing in incredibly admirable ways. At the same time, though, we see in other sectors of the Jewish teenage world a very high level of disengagement as well from Jewish life, from connection with Israel. Although there are some approaches that seem to be promising and engaging them as well, but we're seeing a lot of this turning off. So just some examples of that. Another little sneak preview of the research that you're going to see. When they did this research, what percentage of students claimed to have a strong connection with Israel? 38%. What percentage claimed to know a lot about Israel? 31%. We're seeing in certain sectors walkouts on birthright Israel trips, which is a fascinating phenomenon going on in Israel. There's an article in this magazine, I found it as a visual aid. This is the spring 2017 issue of Hayediot, which is the Prisma network of Jewish schools magazine. There was an article in here specifically on the topic of confronting the religious apathy crisis, about students who have trouble connecting with their Judaism. And it mentions in here that 70% of American teens, not just Jewish teens, but teens in general, were apathetic to organized religion, and they see it as, quote, benign whateverism, which is an interesting phrase also as we think about this broader disengagement with religion. I would say more about this disengagement, but I will tell you, every single article I've read on this topic recently cites the Jewish Education Project's Gen Z project on this. So there's nothing that I can add beyond what you're going to see in the data. So I'm going to move on from that. But it says something about the influence of the work Jewish Education Project is doing. So what does this all mean? Like, why is this important for us? So one thing it means is that the conditions are right for teens in the Jewish community, when they are engaged in the right way, to be driving a tremendous amount of the learning, social action, justice work, and community building. And I think when you hear from some of these teens in a few minutes, you're going to realize that these things are in very good hands. So what's our job as adults? Mostly, it's to get out of their way and let them exercise this leadership. But while we're doing this, we also should be dedicating our own energies as quote-unquote adult leaders, although we are being teenified in the process, to think about how we can utilize our collective energies to empower them in new ways. So, for example, the idea of teenagers at Jewish institutional board meetings, an interesting concept worth thinking about. How about teenagers modeling for adults what civil discourse looks like? We held an event last year in the wake of the Parkland shooting, where we spoke openly in front of 280 high school students on the topic of gun control. And we prepped the students who were on that panel of what it means to engage in civil discourse, where your role is not to debate or to convince anyone else to change his or her mind, but to make sure that you can articulate your own view in the way that you would want someone who disagrees with you to articulate your view. And the teenagers, I will tell you, do a much better job of modeling that sort of interchange than many of the adults and other purported leaders in our society. Giving teenagers forums to write and to speak. College newspapers and college journals, some of them have massive online readership. And articles can go viral that are highly influential, including from a number of teens who have emerged from this Westchester Jewish community to take on leadership roles on campuses around the country. A lot of those articles have gone viral. Our teenagers are now more sophisticated than ever. So if college writing and speaking can go viral, why not high school newspapers? Why are not more teens posted on E-Jewish Philanthropy every week? Why is there not, for example, a Prisma journal of teen writing on Jewish issues specifically? I think that's the kind of thing we can push a little bit more. And also particularly curious to hear teenage views on Israel. Today in particular happens to be an interesting day to analyze Israel, but such a wide array of relationships that may be really different than what they were like 20 years ago, and maybe not. Like, let's give them platforms to take leadership in this way. So, of course, teens cannot take on this leadership entirely on their own. That the right adult role models, teachers, guides, coaches can be crucial in inspiring those who are already Jewishly inclined, and also those who are inclined toward disillusionment, as we talked about, to help them keep an open mind, ask the right questions, and remain involved. The tricky thing is, and I don't know if the research touched upon this or not, these people are getting harder and harder to find, in my experience. That the kind of classic pipeline of 20 and 30 years ago of you work at a camp, you go off to college, you involve yourself in some sort of fellowship, you become a professional Jewish educator. In my experience, that pipeline is drying up a little bit. And a lot of the institutions that trained people like that, and I guess I'll sort of put myself in that category, are not what they once were. And I would say a very important communal priority for us, and for anybody who cares about teen empowerment, can be to utilize fellowships or other programs that maybe are yet to be invented for recruiting those educators who might be willing to spend a year or 2 years or 3 years immersing themselves professionally in this work that they've become so passionate about. And some of them may end up making a career out of it, and that's pretty good. And again, for another time I could save my own story, which was very much a story of being prepared to go into a completely different profession until the right person came to me and said, why don't you spend 2 years doing this and see if you like it? And well, for better or for worse, here I still am. But I think it's important for us to think about that as the adults in the community. And then finally, to the teenagers yourselves, I will say, one of our missions in working with you ought to be to help you see it as a priority for your generation to be role models like that for the generation that will come next. That you're doing amazing work now for the Jewish community. Imagine what the impact could be on our broader world if you now make a goal for yourselves that when the next generation comes along, which, by the way, this one is Z. I have no idea what comes next. That was a sort of short-sighted naming convention, but I'll let other people worry about that. That if you could take it upon yourselves to take this passion that you've already demonstrated and perhaps turn it into a professional career of your own. Imagine the impact that that could have. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the data themselves. And it's a pleasure. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much for laying the foundation fundamentally for why we call this Gen Now as opposed to Gen Next or Gen Tomorrow. We believe very centrally to all of our work that this is the generation today that's making a difference in the lives of all of the people around them, and our data ended up proving that point for us. So I'm excited to very quickly share with you our data. What I'm able to share with you now briefly is the tip of the iceberg of the rich data that these 18,000 teenagers provided us. Second, important highlight and understanding of this data, you'll hear us refer to youth serving, or hear me refer to youth serving organizations as we speak about this study. We very much believe that as opposed to youth movements of the past or youth groups, at its core, the role of these organizations that we worked with is to serve this important generation. And so if you hear me say YSO, that's a shorthand for youth serving organization. So let's dive in. As you heard earlier, Rostov Consulting was our partner in this study, and it really could not have happened without them or the funders. We also want to note that there was an advisory team working with us. This is a sound scientific study. This is not, I'm not a sociologist, but this is not something that a group of people who don't know anything about research conducted. This is a study that is based on metrics that were field tested, and therefore we can speak with some level of confidence in what we're sharing. Before I dive in, I pause at this slide because it really is my favorite slide in all of the presentations that I do. We brought together 14 youth serving organizations, YSOs, and as you look at this slide, you can see the spectrum of Jewish life and Jewish engagement. We have secular Zionist organizations up there. We have Orthodox Zionist organizations up there. We have Chabad. We have BBYO, which is pluralistic. The whole gamut of the Jewish community is represented in this study. And that is a tribute to the dedication of the organizations that do serve our youth, and to a commitment to making sure that we're doing our very, very best to represent our work in line with who this generation is and not based on the assumptions of the past. The metric that I mentioned a moment ago was grounded in effectively 4 core questions, which we believe are the central questions for adolescents. Who am I? To whom and when am I connected? To whom and for what am I responsible? And how do I make a difference in this world? All of the measures in this study, they're not questions of, do you light Shabbat candles? Or do you go to synagogue on Friday night? They're all metrics and measures that are seeking to help understand how the Jewish organizations are helping our teenagers answer these questions, and all of the sub-bullets, which I recognize are a little hard to read on the slide, but all of the sub-bullets within each of those 4 questions. So how do we do this study? Over 88,000 emails were sent. These were lists provided by the 14 organizations. In addition, anonymous links were provided, some live at a variety of events, some posted on Facebook. As a result of the text messages, the emails, but most critically the anonymous links, we did have a sample within this study that is reflective of young people who are not engaged in the Jewish organizations and the Jewish community. So we do feel confident speaking with a degree of, a broader degree of understanding that these are Jewish kids who are connected in some way to Jewish life. In order for them to get the link, they had to have some degree of connection. These are not random kids who have never had a Jewish friend or never connected in any way, otherwise they wouldn't have received the link itself. So these are not the outermost link of Jewish life. But there are enough data points within this study that it's statistically relevant for us to extrapolate that this is a study of Jewish community-connected teens, but not necessarily narrowing it to say only teens who are connected to youth-serving organizations, which is a really important understanding that we can extrapolate to the breadth of teens who have connected to the community. So this slide shows us that 79% of the teens said that their families have 2 Jewish parents in the household. In New York, this data point is actually not so off base with the data that we have here in New York from the last Jewish population study, where 22%, I believe it was, of the community said that they were part of an interfaith family. But nationally, this statistic is incredibly, incredibly high. So one of the important findings to note is that our youth-serving organizations are doing a tremendous job, and all of the data will show as we see that the youth-serving organizations are impacting our teenagers in incredibly important ways, and at the same time the population within our organizations are families that are, as a rule, 2 Jewish parent families, and we know that the Jewish community is shifting and changing. So a question arises for all of us who are connected to these youth organizations: how do we open our doors and our windows a little bit wider to bring children of interfaith families into our work? This slide, when summarizing it, effectively is saying that engagement as a teenager matters tremendously, and in fact, if you only are engaged until B'nai Mitzvah age, in particular, that in some ways there's a negative impact on the development and identity for our young people. So if we had to choose, it's actually more important, at least from our data, for young people to be involved as teenagers than it is for them to be involved in their earlier years. It is a important and critical finding because the origin of the entire conversation in the last 7 to 8 years started with a data point that showed that post B'nai Mitzvah there was a huge drop-off in engagement in our teen years. So fundamentally, we as a community need to recognize that investment and engagement in these youth organizations and in the teen space is critical. I don't want to say more critical than before, but certainly we need to recognize that engagement with B'nai Mitzvah as the end point is not meeting our goals, which is to help the Jewish community create thriving Jewish teenagers. This was a study, as we said, working with 14 youth organizations. It was not set out to prove that the youth organizations work and make a difference, but fundamentally what we saw very, very clearly is that our youth organizations have tremendous impact and make a tremendous difference in helping our young people answer those 4 core questions in life. So those of us who have worked in the entrepreneurial space, as well as within our historic institutions, we need to make sure that we don't forego our historic organizations for the entrepreneurial space, because what exists works. We just perhaps we want to open our doors a little broader, etc., but our youth organizations are doing a bang-up job. So one of the important conversations that started with our youth organizations was around the idea of competition between organizations. Historically, people sought to engage their young people. I'm a BBYO, or I'm a Habonim, I don't know, drawer, or whatever the commentary there is. But what we learned is that the more teens are engaged in multiple organizations, the greater the impact on their social, emotional health and their development. And we know that today's teens, from prior research, carry multiple identities. And so our natural barriers to say, I can only, we want this to be my teen, in fact, may require us to think a little bit differently about how we can work across organizational boundaries to encourage teens to find opportunities that engage them for who they are, not simply because the organization behind that has an ideology that is trying to bring that young person into the ideology, as opposed to saying, you know what, this person can be an active member of youth organization A and youth serving organization B, and by the end of the process, they're a healthier, stronger, more thriving young person. And I will just say that the youth organizations responded very, very positively to that point. We actually expected them to be really resistant because metrics and numbers and membership matters, and the reality is they got it. They understood that this is really to the best of all of us to break down some of our barriers. What we learned is that our Jewish teens are incredibly proud of being Jewish. There is no, pride is central, it's often culturally oriented, but these teens are really proud of being Jewish. But their notion and understanding is a little bit different than we traditionally think about engagement and religion. This meme always gets a little bit of a giggle because there's something really true and telling about this. And I don't need to read it because I think it's big enough for all of you to see. But fundamentally, we may need to shift how we think about even spirituality as a word, because that word didn't necessarily resonate with teenagers. So, do our teenagers believe in God or a higher being? The question was asked in an open-ended way. They do, and their rates of engagement or understanding of God are on par with Jewish adults. That being said, as a community, if you look at Pew, the Jewish community as a whole has a much lower level of reflection and belief in God. So our conceptions of what our religion is versus our culture and our people are questions that we should be thinking about and exploring in our Jewish education, because perhaps God, which is central to our theology and our belief, is not necessarily the way for us to engage 100% of the teenagers. We're living in an era where the concept of Jews of no religion is increasing, and this is relevant to our teenagers and understanding our generation. In the teen space, we've made an assumption for many years that we need to go light on the Jewish content, that we need to, that the purpose of our work needs to be social action, or it needs to be purely social, but that infusing too much Jewish content is a turnoff to our teenagers. Our data taught us that Jewish content makes a tremendous difference. In fairness, this question was asked about Jewish stuff, so we have some follow-up research to do to understand what is Jewish stuff. But fundamentally, the idea that we have to water everything down isn't necessarily accurate, and important for those of us who are in the education field to recognize that content may actually be a critical part of helping our young people figure out where and how Jewish wisdom is relevant and connected to their lives. So we heard earlier a preview of the fact that this is a generation that likes their parents. This is a data point that's actually not from our study, but the visual is powerful. This is from G. Twiggy's book, iGen, and if you have not read iGen, it's a great book. Fundamentally, we heard in many different ways that our teenagers like their parents and that they associate Jewish life with family, and that family experiences are central to their sense of identity and their sense of Jewish connection. Again, I don't need to read the quote, but the Passover Seder, the matzah balls, all of these different things that are focused on family moments were incredibly critical and had rates of impact on the measures that we were using that frankly astounded us. The impact of the Passover Seder was the most influential across the board of almost any factor in the study. They like to be with their families, whereas we often say that parents and teens that never the twain shall meet, it's like oil and water. What we're seeing is that we have a generation where maybe we need to rethink what family engagement means, and that it's not simply about the early childhood years, but that there are means and opportunities to use the family space to engage the teenager in conversations. It could be conversation starters on Shabbat, at a dinner table. There are lots of different ways to think creatively, but the fundamental assumption that we should not think about teens and parents in the same sentence is being challenged by this generation. So We had, the way the survey was structured, some organizations could add their own questions. A number of organizations, enough again for it to be statistically significant across the data set, asked questions around teen health and wellness. And for any of us who are focused on this generation, we know that for all of their leadership that's being demonstrated and their ability to stand up and fight for what they believe in, this is also a generation that is experiencing higher levels of anxiety and some mental health challenges that probably are part of the motivation as to why the teenagers here wanted to have a day on this. So a couple of the organizations asked some questions. These were the top 5 responses that teens provided about their peers. The question was framed, what do my friends or peers need help with, so that this personal disclosure wouldn't influence the responses. I point out number 5, most importantly, they basically are saying that they need help learning how to have face-to-face conversations with other people. If we think about that for a moment, and we talk about the social media and the fact that our young people have phones at the age of 5, this is a generation that is expressing challenges in some of the basic social interaction that we all take for granted. So one of the questions for us in a communal space, and we believe in community, which often means engaging face-to-face, is how do we help ensure that our young people are learning how to have healthy in-person connection and relationships. There's some other important data points here. You can see them on the board also. So one of the interesting things about this study is that we did a group of interviews subsequent to the survey distribution. And it happened that about half of the young people interviewed were interviewed before the tragedy in Pittsburgh, and about half of them were interviewed after the tragedy in Pittsburgh. So this gave us a pretty important insight into understanding how this generation is thinking about and experiencing anti-Semitism. And we should recognize the name also that this pre-Poway, this is pre all the incidents that are happening in Brooklyn. So if we did these interviews now, a year later, it's possible that the responses would be slightly different. But what we heard and saw was that for many of our teens, particularly those who are day school oriented or from the more traditional communities, the incident in Pittsburgh happened in a synagogue. It's very, very clearly an act of anti-Semitism. For many of our other teens, this was an issue connected to the gun violence and the fact that they refer to themselves as the lockdown generation. And some even were insulted that we would ask the question and place this in the context of about our personal persecution, about Jewish persecution. That fundamentally is showing white privilege by even asking that question. So our understanding and conception of anti-Semitism and our teens' understanding is perhaps a little bit different. And so Israel, we heard Dr. Kay speak about Israel. What we know and what the data showed us very, very clearly is that our teens are really open to Israel, but they don't want to be spoon-fed the idea that it's the land of milk and honey. They want the information. As we heard, they're able to think and consider issues at very sophisticated levels, and we need to provide them the information in high school before they go to college, such that when they arrive on campus, it is not the first time that they're being presented with the complexity of the challenges there. They're open to it, they're connected to it, they're proud of Israel, but fundamentally, we need to make sure that we're giving them the opportunity to own that experience the way that they're owning all of these other issues that they're engaging with in Jewish life.
Come on, don't be shy. Not that everything else wasn't fun, but I really get the fun part of the evening now. We can talk to real-life teenagers. Now, just a couple of words before we explore this world with our friends. This is not a random selection of Jewish teenagers, right? We are not trying, by asking these 4 wonderful people to try and represent all teenagers. They are here to represent themselves, and in a second you'll see they do a very great job of doing just that. That being said, if they say something collectively which somehow disagrees with the data, I might take moderator prerogative to actually point out where there might be a difference in what I'm asking them about, but they all understand that. Now, just so you know, the only preparation these 4 wonderful people, Daniel, Alex, Abe, and, oh no, I was so good at this, Dean,
Can we help you out?
Yeah, please help me out. Because Drew, the only preparation they all received was be themselves. Okay? And that was the only preparation they received, so nothing's rehearsed. So first I'm just going to ask you all in like one little tweet, 30 seconds or less, just introduce yourselves, a bit about yourselves, and then we'll take it from there. So Drew, let's get us going.
Hi, my name is Drew Siskin. I'm a junior at Byram Hills High School in Armonk. I love to ski, I love to spend time with my friends and my family, and I love being Jewish.
Yes.
Hello. So I'm A. Baker Butler. I'm a senior at Blindbrook High School in Rhinebrook, New York. I really like avocados and sandcastles. And in terms of my Judaism, I have a real passion for social action, tikkun olam aspects of Judaism. I'm very interested in politics, science. And yeah, I'm happy to be here tonight talking to all of you.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Zellman. I am a junior here at the LaFell School. I've been going here since kindergarten. I've spent the past 9 summers at Camp Around the Berkshires, a conservative sleepaway camp. In my free time, I love to play softball and spend time with my friends and my younger brothers.
Hi, I'm Daniel. Also love avocados. That's great. I'm a senior at Hastings High School. I participate as an aide at my temple. I'm on the Mosaic board here in Westchester. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and I also love being a Jew. And I went to Eisner for 6 years. So.
Great. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Bryford. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Education Project, and I've been involved in several teen studies before, and nothing gets me more excited than actually talking to the real specimens themselves. Just for those of us with a sociological background, we should understand the plural of anecdote is not data, and that's why we do like having the 18,000 data points to back it up. But these teams really do exemplify a lot of what we want to discuss. We'll do so briefly. I'm going to shoot a whole lot of questions, and let's just start off with a simple one. Hands up who believes in God?
Depends how you define God.
Really? Well, let's talk a bit about that for a second.
So if I were asked if I believe in God, I'd say I don't believe in the vision of an old white-haired man sitting on a throne up in heaven. But I do believe that there is something divine in our world. I do believe there's something beyond science and what we can understand. So in that sense, I would say I believe in God. Okay.
And others who may or may believe in God, you'll put your hands up. Describe your relationship with that being.
Well, for me, it's a similar way. I've always been taught God without he pronouns or she pronouns, just God, like is this kind of energy. And so for me, God is kind of like an outlet to express gratitude for the things that I have and to kind of ground my thoughts and prayers and whatnot. But it's less of like, you know, big white-haired man as well.
Alex, yeah?
So going here, I pray every single morning, and over my summers I do too, and I think that our relationship with God is very special to me. I connect to God when I pray through gratitude and asking for different things, so I consider myself, I have a very close connection to God.
When you leave high school, Alex, do you think you're going to continue praying on a daily basis?
I think a large part of prayer is the community surrounding you, and I think that if I'm able to find that in a place where I go to college, I would love to continue to go to morning services.
Drew, what do you do?
I definitely believe in God. I don't really think of it as a white man on a throne, as my peers were saying. But what I definitely do think is everything happens for a reason, so more of the spirituality of it, and understanding that just because I might be doing one thing one moment, like I said, everything happens for a reason, I'll be doing it for the right one.
Do any of you access, let's call it for the argument's sake, your spirituality in a way other than traditional prayer?
I would say I do, yeah. So for me, Hebrew prayer has always been kind of a cultural background for me. It's something that I enjoyed learning, I enjoyed teaching as an aide in my religious school, but it's never done anything for me beyond that. And so for me, I pray once a night in English in my head. And for me, that's a way for me to kind of ground myself, think about, if it was a hard day at school or just I'm, complaining about the things in my life, I can put that into perspective that I'm living a life of so much privilege.
To add to what Daniel said, I often engage in spirituality in similar ways, and I've kind of moved away over time from the vision of spirituality having to be praying in Hebrew. And partly as a result of programs like Shevet Achim, if any of you have heard of that, and Eden Village Camp, which was a sleepaway camp I attended. I've kind of started to see prayer as something that doesn't need to be something linear. It can be whatever it is that's on your mind, however you connect to something above the normal aspects of your life. So that's how I see it. It doesn't have to be Hebrew, it doesn't have to be in synagogue. I see it in a much more open way.
Yeah, we also agreed we didn't all have to answer all 4 questions, so all 4 people don't have to answer every question, so if they don't answer, it's not because they're abstaining necessarily, but we often hear that your generation is really stressed out. Can you talk a bit to this audience about what it means to be a teenager today, what you're seeing amongst yourself, if you feel like sharing, but amongst your peers as well, in terms of stress, in terms of depression, in terms of the anxieties that we're hearing from your generation?
I think there's a lot of anxiety representing the balance between having a successful school life, or what one considers successful, and managing things such as friendships on social media, as well as balancing the proper time you should be spending on your phone through texting or Instagram or Snapchat. And I think a lot of pressure comes from your surroundings and who you choose to be friends with and the people around you. And in terms of depression, I think this relates to the whole body image issue going on currently, where people are comparing themselves to unrealistic expectations because of media.
I agree with everything Drew just said. I think that you need to be able to have a supportive group of people around you to help you when you are stressed out. Kids these days tend to get very stressed over college and what you're going to do beyond, and tend to get ahead of themselves when thinking about these things. And I think it's really important for adults and kids to know how to help that and be a supportive environment for those people.
Sorry, Alex, who do you turn to? Like you just said, you turn to other people. Like, who are the types of people in your life that you turn to when you're feeling these things?
So I have certain friends I go to, and I can say that my parents are also people that I can go to during those times. And I think, as I said before, it's really important for schools and youth groups to create those outlets for kids to be able to go to.
So I've seen, I think, Alex, you put it really well. I've seen a lot of stress like that in my community. And I think part of it is due to claustrophobia in some respect. I think a lot of times there's this dichotomy between everything that you're seeing on social media outside of your community and all the drama that's going on with your friends right around you. And it can be very easy to get sucked into that and to have that consume you. And for me, at least, I've found and for me and many of my friends, I found an outlet for that in a way that kind of minimized that stress in region-wide Jewish communal organizations engaged in a higher purpose, like J-Teen Leadership, which Alex and I are involved in. So I think youth serving organizations have a very important role to play there in diminishing that claustrophobia-driven mental health issues.
Yeah. You've also seen many of your peers and friends turn to other things which you don't necessarily approve of. Do you want to talk a bit about the causes that you've adopted of one of your projects that you talk about a lot?
Sure. So a few years ago, I and a few of my friends from around my town, from across Westchester, we noticed an uptick in kids drooling, kids using e-cigarettes. And we saw them becoming addicted. We saw our friends falling down in their studies. And we decided we needed to do something. So we got together and formed a nonprofit called Students Against Nicotine. And actually, it just so happens that much of our group is Jewish. Maybe the survey can provide some insight into why that is. But we've been doing a lot of work to try and minimize teen e-cigarette use. And at least in my community, and from what I've seen, it's a big issue, perhaps one of the largest issues among teens today. I'd be interested to hear if you guys agree.
Well, just to explain for this different generation in the audience, yeah. Anyone, like, when you talk about vaping and juuling, like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the equivalent of kids, like, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, doing marijuana, doing high-level chemicals? What's the equivalent, just to try and translate it for us older folks?
So, at least what I've seen is that vapes are a device that literally vaporize whatever you would like into your body. So people can use tobacco, can use marijuana, can use essential oils, whatever they please. But what I have seen personally in my school, in my community, is the same things that you may have went through with the cigarette industry and with the tobacco industry, just at an accelerated pace. So if you see like an advertisement as a child for tobacco, and there wasn't really that much research done, was it helpful, was it healthy, was it not healthy? Now you see it, your friends are doing it on Snapchat, 30 seconds later, 150 people have seen it, and oh, you look so cool, oh, you did, so that acceleration because of social media is definitely a faster cause. It also looks like a flash drive. I don't know if you all have seen it, but this device could easily be done in school. It doesn't make a smell, it doesn't make a real big sight. So it's anonymous almost.
I definitely agree. The only thing I would add to that is, let's be real, kids aren't going to be like, oh, I'm going to stop juuling because I see something on the news. Like, kids don't watch the news. So what I think I need to add is it goes back to the whole Snapchat thing and just the perception of being cool that just doesn't exist. And I think it's a never-ending cycle of people that compete with each other to end up on top of the social hierarchy that's literally just a myth and that everyone follows each other on.
So you don't watch the news, but you've got a bit of information coming your way. So how, like, in a brief conversation, like, you all have opinions about stuff happening in the world, like, you're trying to tell us that you don't need any information to have an opinion, or where are you getting your information from in this world?
I have two sources. Source number one, on Snapchat every day there's this little, I'd say about 3-4 minute video that pops up, and I am blanking on the name right now, but it's literally such a quick, what's it called? Do you know what it's called?
Now this? No.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it just updates me on what I need to know, and also in a lot of my classes we talk about current events as the starter of the day. For example, in my French class, my teacher gives us articles every day in French that we have to translate about current events.
So I'm definitely an anomaly among my peers. But I'd say I get most of my news also from two sources, New York Times and Facebook, both of which are kind of echo chambers, which is something I'm working on.
I can also say that in certain classes around we talk about current events, and I also just talking with my peers about certain different topics is how I get on it.
And I just add, like, I also like to read the news a lot. But there's a lot of great things that like curate news for me. It's like a big topic now, like should Google and Facebook be showing us what Google and Facebook show us? So I definitely see like one side of the spectrum, especially given what I look up on the internet and the emails I'm sending, they know everything. But it's something that I find myself sucked into just as easily as Instagram or Snapchat.
So your generation, besides being called Gen Z, are often referred to by many other names, some less flattering than others. One of the most common ones is the selfie generation, because you're so obsessed with just taking photographs of yourselves. And which, before tonight is over, we should all make sure we get a photo together and put on my Insta account. I don't have it. I actually do. But anyway. So besides being selfish and all about yourselves, can you tell the audience about a cause that you really believe in, that you really hold passionate to who you are as a young adult in the world today? Maybe Daniel, we'll start with you.
So for me, I've developed a passion for developing overt inclusion of the LGBTQ community into the Jewish lifestyle, into the Jewish community. And so working to make it kind of like they're synonyms of each other. They don't have to be religion on one side and pride on the other.
For me, one thing is actually supporting Israel and Judaism and building a strong cohort of teens that are ready to go out into college campuses and fight for Israel and have a good name for the Jewish community. Another thing, as Dr. K was talking about, was the ending the stigma towards mental health and making sure there's a really supportive environment around for kids.
For me, it's kind of been in two camps. Public health and well-being, which includes the vaping, advocacy, and gun safety work, and then also community building things, like starting a chapter of a local political organization, being involved with Jewish community organizations. So I'd say it's the community building and the public health that have really been passions for me.
I think an experience that I've had in my life is joining BBYO. It has completely changed my life because I've met the most awesome people and have really connected to my Jewish self that I didn't even know was there.
This is not an exception. I just want to be really clear about this, that almost every young teen, young adult that we have come into contact with throughout the survey has a cause beyond themselves which they are dedicating hours in their life towards. The exception tends to be those that are not doing anything. Now, you could be a bit cynical about this and say, in order to get to college, you need to do some certain number of hours to a certain cause. But by and large, what we're seeing amongst the teens that we're interacting with at every level, they are far exceeding the minimum required hours in which they need to get into college or to graduate from high school. But they all have these causes which they are passionately involved with. That is the exception. On the issue, that is the rule. On the issue of mental health, just so people know, that the statistics across North America point out the highest levels of mental health problems amongst adolescents today are amongst the lowest socioeconomic class and the highest socioeconomic class. And for different reasons, both of those segments of the population, and just to be clear about it, the Jewish population, despite having poverty in the Jewish community, is disproportionately represented in the highest socioeconomic class and the higher educated class in American broader society. So some of what we're talking about is very evident. One statement each about your connection or relationship to Israel. By the way, all four of these people have spent time in Israel. They are not statistically normal in terms of their connection to Israel, but their answers to this question are their answers to this question. So maybe Drew, start up. What's your relationship towards Israel?
I absolutely love Israel. It is the best place in the entire world, and it is the most safe, happiest, most feeling of home that I could. It's literally indescribable. I'm at a loss of words to explain it.
So I see Israel as an important part of my family and my Jewish identity, which was bolstered by spending 5 weeks there this summer with the Bronfman Fellowship. But I see myself as American with a passion for Israel. I don't see myself as Israeli.
Similarly to both Abe and Drew, I love Israel. I've been there multiple times, and I'm looking forward to spending my summer there and 2 months there with my senior class next year.
So I love the people, the culture, the food, the music, everything in that sense about Israel. It's definitely some political things that have me thinking about it, measuring, what about this, what I like to look more into, read more up on. It's a complex place, and so as a teen, I find myself still developing really what I think about it as a definite statement.
Can I add something quickly to what Daniel said? So Daniel, you mentioned often wanting to learn more about the complex politics of Israel. And I've seen that a lot among my peers. I see a lot of friends who go through our education in the Hebrew school system, and then they're on these social media websites that we've talked about, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, and they're seeing often biased other perspectives without any sort of formal educational or communal outlet to turn to discuss what their concerns are, what they want to know more about Israel. And so I think that's another important role that Jewish communal organizations are playing.
Alex is grabbing the mic. Okay.
Yes, and just to add on to what Abe said, I go to both Jewish school and camp, as I said, and I find that there are many of my peers and friends that don't know a lot about the politics going on in Israel and don't have a say in that. And I think that it's super important to be pushing education for the state of Israel and what it's all about, so when we go out and talk to others, we can share our perspectives and our thoughts on that.
Great. Now, besides all of you being invited to sit on boards of Jewish organisations after tonight's presentation, you now have an opportunity to speak to the audience here and the audience online. Give them one message that you would like to tell the adult Jewish community today about Jewish teens today? What's one thing you would like to, anything, this is your chance to just go for it. What's the one thing you would like the adults in this community to know about Jewish teenagers?
Okay, so I would say Jewish teenagers want moral grounds. So everything beyond whether there's somebody who's never been to temple before, but their family celebrates Rosh Hashanah, or they go every single weekend, they celebrate Shabbat, they keep kosher. We all want the same thing, which is to have something to lead our lives living, to have in the back of our heads, to think, like, am I doing the right thing at every moment? And I see that with the kids I work with in religious school. Like, they grow up young, they get these morals instilled on them young, and they grow up to be these amazing people.
I think it's important to let kids find their experiences, make their own Jewish life. Everyone kind of picks and chooses which parts of Judaism they feel strongly connected to, and it's important to let kids explore what they're interested in, going to synagogue, not different youth organizations, Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, whatever they want. I think it's really important to be supportive of your teens and what they want to do.
I'd say we're not as complicated and crazy as we may appear. I think a lot of teens are looking for a higher purpose, and I think the best way to create effective programming for teens is to make it interactive and to directly ask teens what they want.
I think that the message needs to be clear that being a Jewish teen doesn't necessarily mean going to temple every holiday or staying home on Shabbat, rather than just forming a community and building friendships with people who share the same religion as you.
I've done this now like dozens of times with people that I've met literally 15 minutes before, and not once have they let me down. And I would say this is a general rule. Every time we've asked a teenager to stand up and be counted, they never let us down. And maybe that's one of the messages we want to leave everybody with tonight, is that trust them. Give them the space to be able to be the people that they are supposed to be. Susan mentioned this before, I just want to reiterate it. We call this study Gen Z Now. These are not the Jews of the future. Yeah? They are the Jews of today. In all other aspects of their lives, they are bringing about social, political change in the world when they see anything that they think needs fixing. It's only often in the Jewish community when they are asked to step aside and let the adults do things on their behalf and for them. And yet if we give them more opportunities to stand up and be counted, I promise you, they will not let you down. I really want to thank all of you for being who you are, the people that you are today, and I have no doubt you are going to be an inspiration for many, many years to come. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.